Good morning. Welcome to a sunny Google this morning. My name is Ronan Harris and I look after Google in the UK and Ireland. So you're all very welcome. I've had a chance to meet a few new people this morning, and one of the things that has struck me is I think everybody in the room knows Gareth for at least 20 years. So it's a great testament to Gareth that you all decided to show up at 8 o'clock in the morning in King's Cross. I met Gareth, I think, for the first time about 7 years ago, and he was introduced to work with some of my team, and did an amazing job. And I found myself a couple of years ago turning to Gareth to give me some advice and help as I transitioned into a new role. And I thought I was fixed and sorted until he gave me his book. And now I'm left in the terrible position of trying to figure out, am I a corporate path or am I suffering from corporate traumatic stress disorder? I will pass it. Not mutually exclusive. I'll pass it over to Gareth, who hopefully will reveal the truth and maybe give me a solution for the future. Gareth.
Rona, thank you. So good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for turning out so early and being here this morning for a very special time that we're going to have together. We're 25 to 9. I'm going to be talking and also inviting you to talk to each other at various points through the next 40 minutes. And then we'll have a Q&A. And I know with Google audiences, and I certainly know with my clients, that I'm going to get some really, really good questions at about 9:15. One of the strange things for me about working with Google is that I am always the oldest person in the room. I'm working with people, on average, probably 30 years younger than me, who I think look at me sometimes and are slightly bemused. I had a very interesting experience in Dublin about 3 weeks ago when it was Bring Your Parents to Work Day. And I was walking around the Dublin office and I'm 61 and I'm thinking, what are all these old people doing here? And of course, the interesting thing was the way that the Googlers were looking at me with that slightly sort of, benign, are you all right? Do you know where you're going? I thought, well, no, but yeah, lovely. One last thing before I get going. This is, as a massive lifelong David Bowie fan, it's hugely significant. Here we are in the Aladdin Sane room. And I can remember going out and buying the vinyl in October 1973 as a 16-year-old, and wow, what a moment that was. Yeah, I can still sing you all the lyrics, but not today. So, this is obviously a very special book for me, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about some of the content. But I'm also going to invite you to think. I know it's quite early, but I'm going to invite you to do some thinking. And I'm going to start with a little story of a true event that happened only a few years ago. And this is a report into an incident in an organisation. And I think the findings and conclusions reached by this report are very interesting. And the theme of I went backwards. The theme of the report was one simple sentence. He'll get mad. And I'm going to show you a redacted version of the summary of the report. And you may recognise some of the phrases. Feared a negative reaction, psychological pressure, unjustified risk, dominated by the goal of, at any cost. And if I fill in the blanks, you may recall the event in 2010. The plane carrying the Polish president, Lech Kaczynski, crashed, killing nearly 100 people. And the conclusion of the report was that the presence of the Air Force commander had placed psychological pressure on the pilots to go against everything that they knew in their training, and the flight recorder captures the words, "He'll get mad." And because two professionally trained people were so scared of a reaction of a person who wasn't even on the flight deck, he was back at the back of the plane, they took a terrible decision that killed 100 people. Now, here we are in the corporate world. It's highly unlikely that anybody's at sort of mortal risk of death or injury as we assemble here this morning. But I wonder what happens to us when we are confronted with a fear. Oh, no, he'll get mad. We'll come back to this. 100 people. What is the book about? How human behavior is conditioned in the corporate world. How managers come to adopt unconscious controlling habits that are counterproductive, inhibit growth, and that create cultures of fear. And yet none of us in this room set out to cause people to be fearful. None of us. 2018 has been a very interesting year, apart from the fact that a seminal book was published. This is the year that we have woken up. We have woken up to the fact that we are on a mission to obliterate every other species on the planet, and we are 60% through that job. That's shocking. We've sort of known that for some time. 2018 may be the year when we just catch ourselves and say that we can't do that any longer. 2018 has been the year of plastic, when we've woken up to the fact that we are choking our oceans. The Pacific Garbage Patch, which you may have heard of, which is predominantly plastic waste in the Pacific Ocean. It is the size of France and Germany combined. Just think about that for a moment. A patch of waste the size of France and Germany combined. Nobody talks about the North Atlantic garbage patch because it's not quite as big. And this is the year when the IPCC report, just a few weeks ago, told us that we have 12 years to save ourselves. If we don't make radical changes to the way we live, the way we consume, we will do irreparable damage to our climate, and millions of people will have to change the way they live. So quite a year for us to be shocked into some of these changes. Now again, you can say, well, yeah, no, I sort of get all that, but what can I do on a daily basis? I work in Google, I work in retail, I work in... Well, this was also the year when we really woke up to how we behave with each other, how we treat each other. So the Me Too movement, the Time's Up movement, bringing out harassment, bullying, intimidatory behavior, controlling behaviors in our workplaces. And here we are. I've worked with Google now for, as Ronan said, maybe around 7 years. It is a privilege to work with this incredible organization. I hold this organization in the highest regard. This organization reinvented the corporate workplace 20 years ago and the way that we actually do work with each other. And even this organization, just a few weeks ago, you will know, 20,000 Googlers went out onto the streets. And that was not in protest against their leaders, it was in solidarity with their leaders. That is the wonderful thing about the way Google do things. 20,000 people went out on the streets to say, this concerns us, we want our company back. This is not how we want to be with each other. Yeah. We are waking up in what I describe as a corporopathic world. And I do not believe that these things here are not linked. I think the way we behave with each other at work has caused these problems that we have for ourselves. And so the way we behave with each other at work is the way that we will start to address some of these things. We all know what it looks like to do the right thing, but do we have the courage to do it? Corporate workplaces have the 3 conditions for abuse to be systemic: power, fear, and secrecy. We give power to managers over other people. We give those managers power to evaluate, to rate performance, to award promotions, to give bonuses, to take away opportunities. Immense power. We underestimate that power at our peril. We place a hierarchy above those managers to keep them in check. So even as a manager, if you think, I know what the right thing to do, oh, hang on a second, I wonder when I report to my boss, I wonder if that will go down okay. The Air Chief Marshal in the cockpit of that plane said he'll get mad. The hierarchy was sitting at the back of the plane, blissfully unaware of any conversation that was going on, and yet his name was being taken in vain. And so much of what we do with each other at work actually is in secret. We have one-to-ones behind closed doors, quite rightly so. We say things are confidential. We ask people not to share certain things. And even if poor behaviour is witnessed, who is going to call it out? Who's going to be in a meeting, and who's going to be the one who stops the meeting for a moment and says, please don't talk to me like that? That's a pretty brave thing to do. When actually, all of these behaviours become quite normalised. We don't even notice. Ronan talked about musing on whether he may or may not be a corporapath. Well, I'm not going to comment on that. What I am going to say to you is that I have definitely been a corporapath in my working life. I would say particularly was it when I was in my late 20s. I was a young CFO. I was very arrogant. I was very driven. I'm high red on insights. I'm an ENTJ. And yes, definitely. A conditioned personality state. So we are not psychopaths. We are not sociopaths. Outside of work, we are completely normal and loving, and we have empathy. But inside of work, under pressure, that empathy can depart. So actually, we can become controlling and manipulative. We don't even know that we're doing it. Those behaviours can be very intimidatory. And we create fear. We don't mean to. So what is a corporapath? Well, there is a 20-point test in the book. Are you brave enough to engage with the questions? Yes. I even when I was writing it, I was thinking, oh God, I'm past number 5 now, and I'm toast. And I introduce us all to the corporate hostage. Because those small acts, Ronan, what you would refer to as leadership litter, the small things that we do that just become normalized, that just become the way we do things around here. Wouldn't dream of behaving like that with our friends or our family. Well, maybe. Where controlling behaviors become the norm. And so there has to be a contract. There has to be a Faustian pact that we have with our employer. Well, it's okay that, you know, I can get stressed and anxious because, you know, I'm paid really well, and look at the benefits, and look at the place I work, and look at the food, and look at the, and look at my CV. So, you know, I've had 3 moves, and I've only been here a year in this role, so I really need to do because it doesn't look very good on the CV. The stories that we have that trap us. It's unthinkable to leave. Are you a corporate hostage? In the corporate form of Stockholm Syndrome, where we become in love with our abuser. I've coached over 200 executives in the last 15 years. I can't tell you the number of times I've had a senior executive download stress and anxiety for 20 minutes and at the end say, "But I love my job." Okay. And corporate traumatic stress disorder. We've all heard of PTSD, and PTSD is becoming more and more public. We've even had a case where one of the assistants working for John Bercow, the Speaker of the House of Commons, was signed off work with PTSD. So the corporate version, PTSD is typically caused by a single violent act, war, abuse, violence in the street. We don't come into work every day to violence, but we do come into work every day to a low-level, persistent stress and anxiety. There's a test in the book. Dare you take the test? And if you take the test and you score quite high, will you then go and seek some assistance? Better not take the test, really. Now, 20 years ago, a very bright guy called Daniel Goleman gave the world emotional intelligence. I know there were some others. If they were in the room today, they would say, no, it wasn't Daniel. I understand that. He wrote a seminal book around emotional intelligence. And fundamentally, the 2 pillars of emotional intelligence, self-awareness and self-regulation. The ability to calmly consider, this is what's happening to me, and therefore this is how I'm going to respond. A calm, rational consideration. Brilliant. And that book has sold in its millions. Who knows? That book sold in its millions, and there are courses all around the world teaching people how to have better emotional intelligence. But here's the issue with emotional intelligence. It wholly depends on us being in a calm and rational state, or being able to get ourselves in a calm and rational state. When we're under pressure, that calm and rational state is not available to us. We can't access it because our brains don't work in that way. We're under pressure most of the time. That pressure, in my view, is getting worse and worse. When I started out 40 years ago, I could write somebody a letter and wait 5 days. It was lovely. I might have taken my briefcase home on a Friday night, but nobody phoned me and there was no email. It was bliss. And here we are. We can send an email to somebody at 6:30 in the morning. We can arrive at our desk at 8 thinking, well, I haven't responded yet. It's madness. What happens to us under pressure is we basically go into fight or flight. We get very high levels of adrenaline, very high levels of a stress hormone called cortisol, and as human beings, we are not biologically designed to run high levels of those chemicals for the time that we do. We're designed for those things to be happening, maybe once, twice a day when we really need survival. And now we're running those high levels of chemicals pretty much through the day. It could be 6:30 in the morning. All I need to do is check my phone. I don't even need to open the email. I just need to see the name of the person that sent it. And I can be going, oh, for God's sake, it's 6:30 in the morning and I'm already running adrenaline. We're in survival mode. Actually, what we're doing is we're rewiring, which is why so many of the aberrant behaviors around us that we wouldn't tolerate outside of work just become normal to us because we've got used to them. We know how to handle it. We don't realize that actually we're suffering from an anxiety disorder. And under pressure, EQ won't cut it. We need CEQ, corporate emotional intelligence, that is available to us under pressure. And it has 4 pillars. 3 didn't seem enough to me and 5 was too many. Pillar 1, we have to have an awareness of how we behave unconsciously when we're under pressure. Because it is unconscious, we are unaware of it. We have to be smacked in the face with that self-awareness under pressure. And we have to make our default reaction to pressure being curious, not getting impatient. When one of your team comes to you and says, oh, really sorry, boss, but I'm not going to make that deadline I committed to, what's our default? If our default is impatience, we've just punished that person, very subtly, but they will feel. I know it's really hard to smile and to say, okay, let's look at what we can do about this and be curious. So what was it about the deadline? Yeah, it's really hard. When all you want to do inside is scream. I get it. So this is the bit, or one of 2 bits today, where you will just do a little bit of work. And I'm going to give you 5 minutes. Please have a conversation with the person who is sitting next to you, because here's the question for you. What is your worst habit as a manager when you are under pressure? It says 10 minutes there. We'll do it in 5. Yes, if it were later in the day, I'd give you 10 minutes, but I don't want to make you feel too depressed. So, 5 minutes with the person next to you. Make sure you hear from each of you. You have 5 minutes. Thank you, everyone. I've asked that question to thousands of managers over the years, and I love watching the reactions because nobody ever has a problem finding an answer. Actually, what they do first of all is they send out their little scout answer, which is, well, I think, and then when they realise they're safe to fess up, they go, oh, let me tell you what, and then it becomes a competition. You think that's bad? Oh, yeah. I'm going to take some questions at the end, if I may. So hold your question, please. No, just some. Which, the question assumes that all your audience are managers. I'm not a manager. I understand. So the question, I'm sure you adapted for your own benefit, which is, what is my worst habit with colleagues or peers? Yeah. So looking around an audience that is answering that question, I see lots of this. Because it's amazing how we can't talk about this without actually physiologically recreating what happens to us. And here's the truth. Under pressure, we will either become over-aggressive, we will lean into that person, our tone of voice will become clearer, because we can't strike them, but they will know that they have been struck. Or indeed, we withdraw and we take it away and we do it ourselves. And in that moment, they are dismissed. Either of those is not a particularly pleasant thing to be on the end of. We do this to people every day. We just become unaware. So thank you for sharing those answers. The second pillar is about positive learning. We have to help people learn through their struggle. People are going to struggle. We take incredibly bright people, we give them very stretching objectives and lots of autonomy. They're going to struggle. Struggle's great. Unfortunately, some people don't feel safe to look as though they're struggling. Maybe sometimes in meetings, what we really want in meetings is super rock solid confidence. That's not the most natural state in the world. We're always learning. Our brains are constantly reforming connections. Are we learning negatively through being conditioned with consequences? Are we learning not to do things? Or are we learning to be free to experiment, to try things out? There's a joy in a creative struggle. And again, it comes back as a manager and a leader for how we hold people and how we react when we're under pressure. Transparency and vulnerability, bearing in mind that secrecy is one of the enemies. Fear can really be fostered in that atmosphere of secrecy. So when the next time you choose to not to share something with somebody, either for fear of hurting their feelings or they don't really need to know, get the facts out there. Facts can never hurt people. Share information. Let people in on what you know. When they know everything that you know, I promise you they'll pretty much reach the same conclusion that you do. And vulnerability. And I am not talking about a manufactured vulnerability to look as though I'm strong. So me sharing information about my family are all here today. This is such a joy for me. My wife's sitting here, my son and my daughter are here today. But me telling you about my family is not me being vulnerable, that's me being human. Being vulnerable means saying, I've no idea. It's such a great question. I've no idea how we're going to do that. Can you help me? And how safe do we feel going to a meeting and saying to our boss, boss, good question, I don't know. I've no idea. Isn't that great? Yeah, it's not necessarily what's required. And we have to keep a grip on reality. And this is what we've lost. We've lost connection with plastic and the climate. We've lost that. We're in our corporate world. And I won't look at Ronan when I say this. Numbers, targets, objectives, they're not real. Organizational structures are not real. We treat these things as though they are immutable objects. The most important thing. No, people are the most important thing. What we are striving to do in this great cause, that's real. Doing the right thing is real. And so many of us, me included, are guilty of saying fine and noble words and meaning them when we say them. And then our actions betray the fact that we don't really mean it. How many of us have said to our teams, you are the most important thing to me? People are the most important thing. Oh, by the way, you're one-to-one next week. Could we just put it back? Because anyway, we've talked really, haven't we? Was that all right with you? Of course it would be. Yes, excellent, good, right answer. Yeah. And I have a real challenge for you. The final question I'm going to leave with you today, maybe just to talk to each other in a moment, is, you know, what is your leadership commitment for 2019? And the words are easy. My commitment is, I need to be better at. So the real question is what you're going to do about it. So, yes, I am on a bit of a mission. And Ronan again, and Josh, where's Josh? Yeah, he may be still working outside. Josh, no, that's not Josh. So Ronan, you know, thank you so much for hosting this incredible event for me today. You know, real appreciation. And Josh Lawson, who's put all the work in, you know, so grateful. We have to make 2019 the year, because we're running out of time. How we treat each other, that's where it starts. Everything else will fall into place. So, one last little 5 minutes with each other, and then we're going to do a Q&A. What is your 2019 commitment as a leader, even if you don't have a team? How are you going to influence and lead your peer group? Just before you start answering that question, you better mean what you are about to say. 5 minutes with the person next to you. Share your thoughts. So, here is the acid test. You've just heard yourself issue some fine and noble words, some wonderful intentions. And as you sit here this morning in the nice calmness of this incredible environment, you meant every single word of it. But it will count for nothing unless you take an act of courage. Take an irrevocable act as you leave here today or as you get back to your own working space that will bring that commitment to life in some small way. Otherwise, they're just great intentions, and we are so full of those. Here are the fine and noble intentions of this incredible organization that we're in today. And amazing. And Ronan and leaders like Ronan around the world mean every word of that. And like all leaders, struggle occasionally to make it come to life. Sometimes clumsy in the way. That's beautiful. Clumsiness is a wonderful thing. We should be freer to be clumsy with each other, because that means that we're actually trying something. And one last thought. So Matt Britton couldn't be here today. Matt did me a great personal courtesy by reading the manuscript of my book 6 months ago, and he said to me, I'll read the book. If I think it's any good, I'll give an endorsement. If I think it's rubbish, I won't. And this is what he said. And the thing I really want you to notice is, yeah, Matt said it. The way we are working, our corporate workplaces are changing the way we're wired, and we need an awareness, and we need to get better control over that as we go into 2019. Now, I have a prediction about this organisation. I think what's going to happen maybe early next year is there'll be another walkout. I think this time around 60,000 Googlers will go out onto the street, and 60,000 Googlers will look at each other and say, well, since most of us are out on the street now, let's go back in and sort this out with each other. This organisation has the capacity to reinvent the corporate workplace again. It did it 20 years ago. It has the capacity, the potential, and the leadership to do that again and show us how to do it. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for being prepared to engage with each other. So we've got 15 minutes or so of questions and answers. There are 2 roving microphones. Who has an unbelievably challenging question for me? So Dave, I'll come to you in a moment. So let me take this one. There's a microphone down here.
Is this okay? So my question, something I struggle with is that I think I am a very helpful human connection person, etc. I have a hard time not making enemies of the people who are unhelpful and are hurting my career.
Yeah, yeah. And is the question, what should you do about that? Yes, okay. Otherwise, I just simply say, oh, yeah. So here's my experience. When we're under pressure and somebody does something to us, our survival mechanism endows them with a negative motivation. They do not have a negative motivation. People are not setting out to hurt us. There may be the odd individual. In 80,000 people around the world, there's going to be the odd individual. As there is in any family, any village, any town, any religion, there are going to be some aberrant behaviours. But so my advice would be to assume a positive intent and be curious and go and inquire as to what lies behind. Just a couple of questions. You may find, and I know it takes an act of love and care to do that, and I know sometimes we think, well, but it's their problem, not mine, and I've got a million things to, I know. But we have to start somewhere. Otherwise, we just become the victim of these things. David.
Is that okay, Gareth? Yeah? Can you hear me?
I can.
Gareth, I've just sent an email out to put your name forward to be at the next G20 summit to do this exact same presentation. What single piece of advice would you give to global leaders at the moment?
I so wish I hadn't worked with you over the years. It's a sort of question that, okay, the single, well, for me it starts with human relationships. If you're in the G20, then look around the 19 people that you are with here today and build a relationship of trust with those 19 people. And do nothing else in the 3 days. And if you can increase the level of trust and openness and transparency, and I know that you'll look at somebody across there and think, their cyber hacking might, I get that, but it's still a human being. And those behaviours are born mostly of fear. The reason you are doing that to me is you are fearful of me. The reason I'm doing this is because I'm fearful of you. So how about we actually just try and build some relationships? And that's why I believe that it's the way we behave with each other. It has to be the starting point. Ronan.
Maybe a slightly similar question, but Gareth, you've looked behind the curtain at Google for many years, and we see ourselves, I think, increasingly in the spotlight for being at the centre of social and various types of change and disruption. So that pressure is increasing on us as a corporate.
Yes.
And what do you see us doing, whether the leadership or the company, however you would like to describe it, that's a bad behaviour under stress?
I think that there are still too many pockets where aggression is actually the most prized and rewarded quality. So I work with a number. So when people ask me about diversity, for example, I go straight to diversity of personality type. So I'm not an expert on gender diversity, inclusion, ethnicity. Those things are unbelievably important. But I go to diversity of. So I've worked with senior leaders who are more introverted. Maybe green and blue on insights, maybe F types on Myers-Briggs, and people of that personality type will sometimes struggle in a meeting to look like they've got rock solid confidence, and that therefore sometimes doesn't become a safe place for them to be a reflector or to say the temerity to say I'm not sure. So I think the more that you as a leader, the more that your team can really embrace the diversity around the teams and the table and create a safe place. So I've had lots of discussions we've had them, had them with Matt or whatever about psychological safety. And we talk a lot about psychological safety in all organisations now, picking up that language. And then on occasions under pressure, I am found out because do I really want that person to feel safe? You see, if they feel safe, they might get a bit complacent. And I can't have that. So, yeah, that would be the... We have time for 2 or 3 more. Jeremy?
Do you get into...
Now, do you really want to ask me a closed question, Jeremy? I mean, well, what's a...
How do you get into the how you help each other in the organisation? So if you're in the middle of an organisation as a manager, for example,
Yeah.
and you demonstrate these behaviours down and lead in that way, how might you demonstrate upwards and encourage your leaders to do that? Or indeed, if you are at the top, how do you get people to encourage you to do it?
Well, let's just focus on upwards at the moment, because the way we manage our bosses is actually very critical to this. And the first thing is taking some courage. When it feels like the only answer we can give our boss is yes, we sometimes maybe just have to be brave enough to say no. So a little bit of an act of courage. In my experience, the fear is way greater than it needs to be. And most senior leaders I know are desperate for their people to come to them more and be more challenging and more pushback. Now, I know when some leaders say that, and then their behaviour doesn't necessarily reward pushback sometimes. So, but it does take that. And then what happened? A number of times, a client will say to me, "Well, no, but my boss would never let me do that." And when you asked them, what did they say? Well, no, there's not even any point in asking. So when was the last time you actually challenged your boss? Because you're endowing your boss with very controlling behaviours. When was the last time you challenged them? Oh, never. So not really fair, is it? To think that this is how that they won't let you do that. So they go to the boss. The boss says, "Brilliant. Thank you for stepping forward with some initiative. I've been waiting to see this." So, but it takes courage. Mike? Good. We have 2 or 3 minutes left.
So I've worked in sales organisations, but I'm not a salesman. I lead technical organisations, and I would challenge your point about using the word no, because those people wake up every morning and sharpen their teeth with a file to deal with that word. So how do you avoid the no but still mean no?
So Mike, and good job we've known each other 20 years. So I am really going to counsel you not to seek to manipulate other people. So if what you mean is no, then say no. And if that means that there is a consequence to that for you, and I know these are easy words for me to say, but it has to start somewhere, and we have to get more experience of being confident in speaking truth. We have to. So I understand that sometimes that can feel too risky. So maybe a coping mechanism might be coming out of a meeting, grouping with some colleagues, and then going back with a calmer communication. Maybe. I love the look on your face at the moment, in which case we move swiftly on. Now, there's one, and I'm going to take just one. Right, we'll take these 2 last questions and then we must close. Did you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I haven't read your book, but I'm guessing that corporate emotional intelligence is very much shaped by the corporate that you're in, right? Because you can't choose really who you surround yourself with and so on. So how does that differ from, I guess, the real world where you can have more choices?
Yeah. Well, let's just separate for a moment. Real world, family, friends, corporate world, work. So I ran a session a very interactive session with a group of mental health professionals about 3 weeks ago. There were 20 of them in the room. And the issue of bullying in the workplace was so present for them. They work in the National Health Service, and some of those people are being bullied by their teams, as well as living into... Why? Because they don't have enough resource. They're being asked to do the impossible. And now they're having to get their teams to do the impossible. And their teams are saying no. Or actually, what they're doing is not necessarily saying no. They're either going off sick, or they're claiming stress, and they're putting... And so many people in that room were saying, you know, I'm being bullied by my own direct reports. So corporatism is everywhere, everywhere. And last two questions, and then we must close. John.
Yeah, you're shaking.
Good. Excellent. Good question.
So the Jesuits said, give me a child to the age of 7 and I'll give you the man.
Yes.
So there's a lot of thinking that says that basically our personalities are pretty well set by the time we're 7, 8, 9.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, how do we change when we're 40 and we're in a leadership role in an organisation?
I love to say when we're 40. Yes. How do we change when we're 61? Yeah. 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 Well, you know, John, there is no hope for you and I, but there is hope for the 40-year-olds. So, I mean, I would agree. There's so much that is the patterns, the thing, you know, whether it's a mix of DNA or the way we were parented, that is say. But that doesn't mean to say put that same individual into one working environment, put them into another working environment, which one with a controlling fear, and one with a nurturing curiosity, and that people will behave in totally different ways. Of course, there will be similarities of values, but totally different because the environment in which they find themselves. And one last question, and then we will.
So often individuals who are good at managing up are not so great at managing down, or that are great at building relationships up are not as good at building relationships down, and probably vice versa as well. A lot of the recommendations you've been giving is on kind of the individual, on building self-awareness, on learning to say no or pushing back. What do you think are some of the processes that a company can put in place to create more accountability, to drive kind of more empathetic behaviors in all directions?
So I think in a company like this, I think it does have to look at the way things like PERF and OKRs are done. And it does have to look at the balance of those between, you know, hard, measurable, metric-based and more intangible ways of a team assessing what psychological safety is. So I've often talked about, you know, how do you measure psychological safety in this organisation? And, you know, Google Geist and MFS and things like that, manager feedback, is one way. But I think there is a challenge maybe of looking at how psychological safety is measured, of how we can really know whether people feel psychologically safe to be honest with each other at work. And managing up, a skill in managing up is very often, you know, I've learned politically, you know, how to do these things. That is also an act of manipulation, and I understand that. I worked for a bully for 12 months. It was horrendous, and I learned how to survive, and I learned how to manipulate. And in the end, I got my revenge. It's 25 years ago. So, thank you. I want to say a particular. Where's Josh? Yeah, Josh. So, Josh, thank you so much for putting. Josh created the whole morning for us. So, Josh works here at Google. Thank you so much. And Ronan, what can I say? Really so appreciative of you hosting this for me. Thank you. Oh, and clearly, you know, books, CDs, all outside. I will happily take your money. I will happily sign a book for you.
So thank you very much, Gareth. I feel like I've just had a leadership workout this morning, so thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Please join us in the lobby for a coffee before you leave the building. Thank you.